Rural Ontario has a lot to offer, including jobs. But getting new talent to fill them is not as simple as people there would like. Here for more, we welcome in Walkerton, Ontario, Gemma Mendez-Smith. She's Executive Director of the Four-County Labour Market Planning Board, and in the township of Eris, just north of Guelph, Ashleigh Weeden, PhD candidate in rural studies at the University of Guelph. And we're delighted to welcome you two back onto our airwaves here at TVO tonight. I just want to start by actually showing a map of a place that I suspect, of the 15 million people who live in the province of Ontario, how many people have never heard of Saugeen Shores? I'm willing to bet the majority. But there it is, in Bruce County, just south of the Bruce Peninsula, on Lake Huron. And we're going to talk about Saugeen Shores this evening. Ashleigh, you recently examined this town. What was the purpose of your examination?
Right. So we worked with the University of Guelph, Bruce Power, and the town of Saugeen Shores, as well as a number of wonderful local advisors like Gemma, to explore the labor market dynamics in Saugeen Shores. Because when we talk about changing rural regions, this is a really great case study in what that means. So Bruce Power actually represents the largest infrastructure investment in the country at the present time. It's the refurbishment of the major component replacement is actually just this huge driver for local economic development and growth. And with that economic development and growth comes a variety of sort of challenges and opportunities. So we have this interesting change in the local labor force dynamic around the nuclear ecosystem, creating all of these largely high-paying, stable jobs, and then sort of a tourism and hospitality-driven economy through the rest of the year, through the summer, and a changing economy away from balancing historical strengths in agriculture and manufacturing. So you have all of these changing dynamics that you can see. This year, U-Haul said that the Owen Sound and Port Elgin area were among the top 10 in-growth communities in terms of people relocating to that area based on U-Haul driving metrics. And then also this idea that over the last few years, Saugeen Shores has been among the top 25 places to live in the province and in the country. So what does that mean for people that want to work, live, and enjoy the area? So we did this work exploring
hang
this,
on. Before you go there,
employers.
Let me jump in before you go there, because I want to. You've talked about what some of the great things are about living there. You've got a stable employment possibility because of the nuclear power plant. You've got things to do there. You did mention challenges as well. What are some of the difficulties about being in Saugeen Shores?
So we have these challenges again when we have this sort of uneven economic growth, and we would talk about this in terms of a K-shaped economy, right? So you have everything related to the economic industry connected to nuclear energy kind of going in this upward direction. And then you tend to have the difficulties of maintaining staff, of affording to stay in the area if you're not working in the nuclear sector, around who has access to those jobs and those skills, and then making sure that your infrastructure investments around everything from housing to childcare to social amenities is keeping up as well. And that's sort of the other shape of the K that we're trying to address in those challenges. So in this uneven economic growth, we have issues around affordability of housing, which I know you're going to talk about in another section as well for the show, a tension between the haves and the have-nots in terms of people really having this sharp perception of, if I'm not associated with the nuclear energy sector, I'm really struggling to get by. And then finally, this vulnerability that gets created when we focus on a single economic sector. So we saw this in generations previous with sort of manufacturing or milling or natural resource development dependency. When we focus on one particular driver in our economies, it creates this vulnerability in terms of, will we be able to survive if something happens to that industry? So the real challenges are, how do you address that perception that growth isn't benefiting everybody and fostering community cohesion in an area that's actually, the legacy of amalgamation from the 2000s is pretty strong as well between Southampton, Port Elgin, and Saugeen Township.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a good roadmap to start us off here. And in fact, you're right. Tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about the housing crunch in rural Ontario. We know about it in urban Ontario, but it's in rural Ontario too. Gemma, let me get you in here at this point and talk to us about what your role was in the Saugeen Shores project.
Steve, it was really to kind of focus on that workforce development piece and making sure that we don't just focus on the growth that's happening at Bruce Power with the Life Extension Project, and talking also about what skills local people can add to their repertoire, add to their resume. What local training do we need to address to ensure that our local residents can also have access to those available jobs, not just at the Bruce Power Plant, but all the other supply chain industries that did move into the area to support that work. So a lot of work around skills development and what do we need to attract and retain, because the biggest challenge is retaining that workforce once we've attracted them to the area. We also do have a very low unemployment rate, which needs to be considered in this whole discussion, because with a low unemployment rate, the reality is we won't have the skills in our region. So huge attraction associated to housing, but not just for the nuclear plant, also for all the other supporting and locally grown industries in our region.
That's the story in Saugeen Shores, but how much, Gemma, from your perch, could you say this is reflective, in fact, of a much bigger phenomenon across the entire province? Can you say that?
Not necessarily for one reason. And the growth is happening primarily in Saugeen Shores. So all the other surrounding rural municipalities are not necessarily seeing the same type of success from the investment and growth. But also we do have a chronically low unemployment rate, like I mentioned before, and that's been about 10 years. So we have held the spot, I wouldn't say lofty spot, of the lowest unemployment rate for about a decade now. And that means that we don't have the people to fill the thousands of jobs that go unfilled and the vacancies that sit in our region at the moment. So I think that would be one of the unique things in our region, holding that spot as the lowest unemployment rate.
Interesting. Ashleigh, they used to say that one of rural Ontario's best exports are its people, right? People left. But now we have seen, as was just indicated, we're seeing more people moving into rural Ontario these days. I mean, presumably the pandemic has a lot to do with that, but are there any other explanations as well?
So I think going ahead with, we've had sort of more than a decade, or actually more than 25 years of local economic development strategies in rural Ontario and across rural Canada saying, come live, build your business, build your life in these communities due to affordability, due to close proximity to family or neighbors, due to the opportunities like Gemma mentioned around if you're looking for work, there's probably someone looking for your skills. And so we've seen sort of the long game around this sort of culminate in the pressures that we experienced around the pandemic. Now, this comes with an interesting double-sided kind of conversation. And that means that when we're talking about those issues, we need to make sure that we're keeping up our investment in housing stock, that the kinds of jobs that we're asking people to come and fill, pay a living wage, or have the kind of benefits associated with them that need to support the rest of your life. And this was a big part of the Saugeen Shores work, and actually the big impetus why the town reached out and wanted to work with Bruce Power and the University of Guelph to explore this was this idea that, they were hearing from employers that, we can't retain staff, the staff we can retain can't afford to live in the community, or if they live outside of the community, they can't afford to get to their job. And so we have much more than just sort of a labor issue. We have a whole community issue in terms of making sure that not only when we attract people or retain them, as Gemma says, that we give youth the opportunity when they leave that they want to come back or they want to relocate in another rural place. We need to make sure that they're not arriving maybe to a job that can't support them in developing a high quality life, or that they have a place to live, they have childcare, they have access to all the other supports. And that's what really came clear when we were talking to both employers and people that were looking for work or were working in the area, that it's not just the job, it's all these other things that I need. And so as we're seeing this trend of growth and attraction to rural places for a wide variety of reasons, we need to also be mindful of how are we investing in all those services that will make that a place that people can stay and build their lives, recognizing that we've historically underinvested in rural communities for the last 20 to 30 years.
Gemma, which jobs do you think are the ones that are going the most underutilized or unfilled, if I can put it that way?
Well, we have mostly those entry-level positions. We just did some work around remote work and talking about our area's propensity to support remote work and teleworking. And what we do know is 98% of the vacancies in our region need people in the jobs to perform those jobs. And they're mostly entry-level positions. So you asked Steve about people moving to the area and how has that supported the local economy. And yes, we did have an influx of people, but with the introduction of remote work and working from home, the people that are moving are not necessarily coming to take the jobs that are available. So we still find ourselves in a position where many of our entry-level positions are going unfilled. We don't have the population in our region looking for work that could fill those positions. So really, it is an attraction strategy, but more so a retention as well strategy that Ashleigh alluded to earlier. But looking at those, the realities around what people need to live and stay here is really important, and hence some of the work that we've done around the precarious living series.
Well, presumably those jobs, if they're, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but if they're starter jobs or if they're jobs that are often filled by young people who are sort of just getting going in their careers, you're talking about trying to get young people to move to parts of the province that they may not even know about, or whom they may have an impression that this is a part of the province that you go to when you're retired. How do you deal with that image?
I think what we need to look at more so is our focus on our local residents. So while our unemployment rate is low, we do have people in our region that, with a little bit of training and a little bit of working around their situations around precarity, whether that's transportation, housing, there are people we can engage in our community to help with those entry-level positions. But there are also many jobs that people can move here, and as they look at career laddering. So it's a two-pronged approach, and we certainly want people to see the value of getting that first-time experience in the workplace, but certainly there are places that they can grow into as well.
Ashleigh, it's interesting. We often hear stories about the fact that it's very tough to recruit, for example, doctors to go to more rural parts of the province. You don't traditionally think of attracting, let's say, waiters to more rural parts of the province as being a difficult thing, but I don't know. Is that a story that needs telling more often?
We need to talk about how we retain all of the skills we need in a community. Exactly. So doctors being a big issue around that. And then that creates kind of what we talk about in terms of a vicious cycle, where if we're not, attracting all of the cornerstone institutions or investments in infrastructure we need in a community around housing, healthcare, education, social support, living wage, all of those kinds of high impact, high quality of life things, as we de-invest in those or we're unable to do them, people say, well, I can't get into a family doctor, so I'm not going to stay. And then I might not get that entry level job because I'm going to leave to go somewhere else. And then we create this kind of spiral effect that goes downward. And what we really want to see is a virtuous cycle, right? Heading upwards around what do we need to invest in to make sure that we do recruit and retain exactly all of those positions, as Gemma was talking about, as you're mentioning. And I'll just give a personal anecdote. When I first moved up to work for Grey County, I was 25. I moved there in December. Even with a sort of a lifelong connection to the area, it was a bit of a change. It was a big shock. But my attitude there was that was where I knew I wanted to be, and I'd rather spend my life building my career base there rather than driving there on the weekends or whenever I could get a chance to go camping or those kinds of things. So in some degrees, there is a bit of that agency around where do I want to be, but how do we make that possible for the widest number of people possible? And that means, exactly as you said, Steve, creating conditions where taking a service industry job is not seen as lesser than, that provides you with all of the income and social well-being that you need. And we're seeing employers come up with creative solutions for that. They just need a little bit more support to get there. So when we're talking about housing or other infrastructure around childcare and supports to social networks that let you feel like you're part of the community, those are all a big part of that. And I think there's been a recent article, I think in the Financial Post, that talks about this on a wider scale, including some folks from Paisley and the surrounding area around how they're trying to adjust to those as well. So I recommend folks check that out.
Okay. Gemma, maybe you could build on that by saying, I want to know what the pitch is. I want to know when somebody, for example, who might grow up in Grey County and decides for whatever reason they want to go to college or university further south, maybe to a more urban area. What's the pitch that you would make to them to say, we know you left for 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever to do your post-secondary in the South, but come back because what?
Opportunity. And that means that our employers, our community needs to be pitching these opportunities to our young people, particularly when they go off to post-secondary. Some of the work that we did in previous years, Steve, actually highlighted that our post-secondary fields of study didn't actually match what's happening in our economy. So a lot of education to our young people about this is where you can see your career trajectory. So this is where you should be studying, and those fields of study then will match. If you go off and take a post-secondary education that doesn't match what's required in the region, it's hard to make the decision to move back to Grey County, Bruce County, Huron, or Perth. So making sure that you know what's happening, and us as a community information providers, letting our young people know and letting everyone know this is where you can live and have fun, but you can actually build a career here as well. So take that information outside of our borders and make sure people are hearing that message.
The bright lights of the big city are really attractive to a lot of young people, though, Gemma. What do you do about that?
Well, I think people need to go out and experience those bright lights. I did that. I came as a youth to Canada, and I lived in the big city. But once I started to think about settling down, I decided rural communities were where I wanted to be. And our family's been in this rural community now for 20 years. And my career, as Ashleigh, started in this area as an administrative assistant. And here I am 20 years later representing an organization that has quite an impact in the community as an executive director. Did I see that coming? Absolutely not. But I was able to learn and grow my skills right here in this small community and be in this position today. So I think there are many opportunities we don't see right off the bat, but taking that first step as to, where do I want to be? How do I want to live? What do I want to experience? And make those decisions, I think we can see some wonderful things happen in people's futures. And that's the message I would like to send, that rural communities, yes, the story is low unemployment rate and those types of things, transportation, but we're working on those things. Many initiatives exist right now that are addressing those issues, and we're seeing immense success in our region.
Ashleigh, let me get your take on this, because, in politics, they don't only tell you should vote for me because I'm so great. They also say you should vote for me because my opponent is terrible. And I wonder if you need to make the same kind of pitch. Namely, not only is life in rural Ontario terrific, but why would you want to live in places of so much density and COVID-19 and all that other misery when you can get away from it by coming to rural Ontario? Is that a potential pitch?
Well, I think I always worry about pitting communities against each other because I think there's value in all places. But I also think that, certainly what Gemma was talking about in my own experience and the experience of the people that we worked with in this research project that we did in Saugeen Shores, the overarching pitch or sell or whatever we want to call it for rural communities is that truly, because we're in this period where we're trying to figure out what comes next, where we're trying to decide on how we build the future we want to see, there's this opportunity to have an even greater impact when you're in a place that has fewer people and this greater scope of opportunity of what's possible. And so what I would pitch is that if you're at all curious, if you have curiosity about what exactly you want to achieve or do or push or explore, that there's the chance and the very real chance that you can do that and be supported in a rural environment. All of the pieces that go into that are making sure that we're shoring up that curiosity with all of the supports that are necessary in order to allow people of any age, young people or otherwise, to be able to pursue those opportunities. And so, yeah, I do see this for me personally and for many people that we talk to when we're working in these communities. I struggled to feel like I was having an impact in a larger urban environment. And then when I moved and was working in the early days of my career in rural and small towns, I could see that impact immediately. And that is so wonderfully fulfilling and also addicting because you want to keep having that impact. So I'm with Gemma in terms of that regards of you may enjoy certain qualities about Toronto, about other large cities, but the coolest part about rural and small towns is that if you want to see those kinds of things, if you want those experiences, you have the opportunity to create them there. You get to be the curator of the best new restaurant or the best arts and culture event or a really innovative and cool new business that you're building or a leading initiative in the local government. And so that's the invitation that I offer to people, is really that if you really want to try something new and you want to invest deeply, not only in yourself, but in using those skills to build a community you're proud of, there's no greater opportunity than in a rural or small town place.
Gemma, in our last minute here, I know the city I'm coming to you from right now. If you want to buy a detached home, the average price is $1.4 million. What is it where you are?
Well, it's not quite that high, but it's comparable. And I would say anywhere from 500 to 700,000 across our region. Those are the prices we're seeing. And so again, we come to people who can afford those homes, and that's what we need to be working on, making sure that there is affordability of housing at all levels. And we will be a successful community if that's the only thing we addressed immediately.
It costs $500,000 to buy a home in Walkerton?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
Yes, and actually, we have many homes that are being sold that are going well above asking. And it's the same phenomena in the city is happening here in our rural communities. And just within the last 18 months or so, we see that really excelling and exacerbating the housing situation in our region.
Well, that sets us up nicely for the discussion we're going to have on our program tomorrow night, because we are going to focus on the housing crunch in rural Ontario, yes. So let me thank Ashleigh Weeden and Gemma Mendez-Smith for joining us tonight on TVO. Be well, you two. Stay safe, and we'll see you again down the road, I'm sure.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.